We'll start with you. What did you make of today's events?
Well, I think each side got a little bit of something. Mueller basically said for the Democrats that there was no exoneration, that this wasn't a witch hunt. Also got him to basically admit that the president had been uncooperative and even untruthful in some of his testimony. On the Republican side, they were able to kind of stab a little bit at the credibility of the Mueller team. I mean, they talked about some of his lawyers who had actually contributed to Hillary Clinton and some evidence that there was real anti-Trump bias there. So I think each side comes out with a little bit to bolster their case.
Brandi, what do you think of all this?
I think Americans were treated to a predictable display of partisan politics at its finest, of predictable grandstanding. I think both sides were so committed to trying to prove their theories. Neither did it well. And at the end of the day, that's what we came away with. And I was disappointed that both sides couldn't come together for at least a minute, particularly in the intelligence hearing, to agree on and try to find a path forward when it came to irrefutable evidence of Russian interference in our investigation. We are in the midst of another presidential race. I wish they could have done that in a bipartisan way, at least in maybe hour 6 of the hearing. We could have gotten around to that.
Yeah, I'm sure many of Americans feel the same way about that. Hours and hours of testimony. CR, what was the most important moment?
Well, I think there was an important moment. You heard a little bit there, but we have more on it, where there was this back and forth with Mueller about exactly how you can hold a president accountable. Let's listen.
Could you charge the president with a crime after he left office?
Yes.
You believe that you could charge the president of the United States with obstruction of justice after he left office?
Yes.
So I think that was a pretty halting moment, that this isn't over, that you could do something after the president leaves office.
Brandi, what do you think the biggest moment was?
Well, I also agree that was one of the biggest moments. And what's interesting about it is that was a Republican. And I don't think that he knew that that was going to be the answer from Mueller. So it was like this great moment for Democrats by a Republican, Congressman Buck of Colorado. So to me, one of the standout moments actually came during the intelligence hearing. So rewind to 2016, WikiLeaks hacks the DNC's emails and releases those emails. And President Donald Trump on Twitter is just praising WikiLeaks for this. So Representative Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Illinois, he's reading things that Trump said about WikiLeaks' dump of these emails on Twitter. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. You got to read it and things like that. He asked Mueller to respond to it, and I think the result was one of the most pointed criticisms of the president that Mueller has ever delivered. Watch.
Would any of those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not certain I would say.
How do you react to that?
It's probably problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays in terms of giving some, I don't know, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
So he calls President Donald Trump praising these WikiLeaks emails that were hacked from the DNC problematic, saying you're giving a bolster to illegal activity. To me, when you have a guy like Robert Mueller who plays it so black and white, didn't want to make any opinions about did the president obstruct justice, and really played it very close, for him to go out on that limb was something I really haven't seen from Robert Mueller, either during the 7 hours of hearing or in the 448-page report.
Yeah. Sierra, I'm going to go back to you. Could this lead to impeachment that the Democrats are calling for here?
Well, that's the big question, right? Up to now, there have been, I think, 92 Democrats who have called for the opening of an impeachment hearing, at least doing that. And today, CNN reported that after this testimony today, at least one more has now said so. So I expect that gradual number, which has been growing, will continue to grow. I don't think tomorrow you're going to get 50 more Democrats because of today, but I do think you probably will get more. I think the move to impeachment looks more and more likely, especially after today. Although I will say Speaker Pelosi came out after it all and said we're not there yet.
Do you think the hours and hours of testimony that we witnessed today, does that change the way Americans view the Russia probe?
I have a hard time believing that it does. I think at this point, after this long, for Americans, you're either on one side or the other. And I mean, look at what we saw today. You still had Republicans saying this is a hoax, Robert Mueller saying it's not, Robert Mueller saying it's not a witch hunt, the president coming out after and saying it's a witch hunt. So to me, Americans were sort of losers today because, as I had said earlier, they saw just another stunning display of partisan politics. I don't see this as changing anyone's mind. We really didn't learn much today that we didn't know. We really did not.
I do agree, although I would say it like this, however, that a book is different from the movie, as people are saying. I think it is important when you get Mueller live and in person. Hardly anyone's even heard the guy's voice.
Right.
So having him up front and talking, I think is a big moment. And it didn't change much public opinion in the actual report, but I think this could.
You mentioned that last point. Not many people have heard him speak publicly, so I'm going to leave this question up to you guys. This last question here. How do you think Bob Mueller did speaking in public? Not many people heard from him.
I spoke earlier with John McKay. He's a former United States attorney, not only is a longtime friend of Robert Mueller's, but he has also been questioned before this very committee. And I asked him, John, how do you think that Robert Mueller did?
Yeah.
And he said, that's not the confident person that I know. He stumbled a lot. He couldn't answer a lot of questions for legitimate reasons, but he also had to refer to his notes a lot. It didn't seem like he was as familiar with the report as even some journalists are with the report. I don't believe it was Robert Mueller's finest moment, but I'll also add this. It did nothing for some members of those committees to treat him the way that he did. This is a man who is a lifelong public servant, who served in the armed forces, who served his country honorably, with distinction. Both sides loved him up until the point he became the special counsel. So while his performance was a little off, according to people who've worked with him, I do not think it was appropriate for some members of the committee to treat him the way that they did.
I'll just say briefly, he was in a hard position because he didn't want to give any side anything. Didn't want to give the Democrats anything, didn't want to give the Republicans anything. He's a law and order guy, career professional. He wanted to stick to his script. He didn't even want to be there today. So that was part of what was going on. It was a tension-filled room from the moment with a witness that didn't even want to be there.
All right.